So with so many dietary choices like vegetarianism, paleo, veganism,
raw food, fruitarian, pescatarian,
how do you really know which one is the right one for you?
Well, you buy my book for $9. I'm kidding, of course. Yeah, exactly. I don't have a book. Well, really, a lot of diets have become fads because of books, as an example. As ironic as the comedy is behind that, but a lot of times a book comes out and it says, this is the diet that creates this effect, and so it's there's the South Beach diet and there's the Atkins diet. And so they're all, in a way, they're dietary protocols that don't take into account the variety and the complexity of an omnivore. And this is really at its core the argument. People have turned diet or nutrition, the conversation of diet or nutrition, into an emotional and yes, it's ethical because we're concerned about the treatment of animals. So it does become an ethical debate if you start to unpack it and look at its different layers. But the reason it is highly emotional is because it becomes a belief debate rather than a debate of science.
Okay.
And the first thing you need to understand if you're going to have a conversation that is informed is what is the science behind the position. The first thing to understand about humans, and again, let's take diet off of the table, and let's just talk about human beings and our biology. And so that we're not focused on,
the ethics,
preferences and ethics and opinions. Human beings are omnivores or scavengers. An omnivore really is a very successful scavenger if you think about it, because a tiger is limited in what it can eat. And that, of course, also makes it difficult for tiger populations to become extreme, unless, as an example, humans also lived in populations where they couldn't protect themselves, and there was just plenty of meat, plenty of food. But as an example, one of the great markers of human success is the fact that we're omnivores, and it is the fact that we can scavenge and we can adapt and eat whatever we can find, and which it also is why we have such a variety of different foods that we do eat, that we've learned to eat, that we can also become allergic to, because you can be completely fine with a food, and then at the age of 25 you develop an allergic reaction to it. So it's very interesting. But as an omnivore, as a scavenger, you really have the ability to process a lot of different types of food and basically, just to keep the conversation very straightforward and simple, and not try to explain it with a lot of academic vernacular. You're just keeping it basic. If you really think about it, what it comes down to is you have an animal. This animal is capable of eating from a lot of different sources, and this animal is able to then adapt to many different types of environments as it migrates. And we're a migrating animal. We've always, or at least maybe it's a better term to say we're nomadic, rather than a migrational animal, but we're certainly nomadic. We travel, and that's how we've populated the earth, is this desire to move and be, but that requires wherever you go for there to be food. So we've been able to, from from the Antarctic to the the jungles of Brazil to the Amazon, which is a massive difference
Yeah.
in environment. We've been able to adapt and find food and eat and survive and thrive all the way up to this point. In other words, you don't just have some people surviving for a period of time in the Antarctic. It's not just some. You have people that have been thriving and living there since before recorded history.
Yeah.
And you also have people doing the same thing, at the equator and
right,
in this most temperate, these incredibly warm environments. So what it says to you is that humans are fucking amazing at adaptation and at consumption of food and the ability to convert food into energy.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't really matter what type of food it is. We're just really good at conversion.
Yeah.
And that's what omnivores do very well, is that they do take whatever they find. So to suggest that a human being is only, a vegetarian or a vegan or a, paleo or a raw foodist unfortunately, none of these things are really accurate. Mm-hmm. The only thing that's relatively accurate, if you're going to stay with science, is raw food as a general concept, because there is no oven that exists in nature other than fire.
Yeah.
And to produce fire and to create fire and to use fire as a tool to create, to transform food into easier consumption, which is what fire does.
Yeah.
It converts and transforms the food in a manner that breaks it down, and it makes it easier for you to digest more quickly, which is also, there is a lot of theory around the fact that our ability to use fire as a tool for food digestion has also benefited us and allowed us to grow. Now, that's, these are theories. We don't know what it really looked like at that, that time. But again, they're interesting. They're fun for conversation.
Yeah.
So going back in time, we know we didn't have a way to cook food. So what we're left with then is eating food as it is.
Yeah.
Raw. So the digestive enzymes present in raw food, basically the constitution of a plant is perfectly intact when you ingest it. Mm-hmm. And so when you go to digest it, you have everything present.
Right.
You have the all of the nutrients that are necessary to feed the body, and the things that give the body a fuel for conversion, fuel for conversion to make fuel. And then you have the roughage, which allows for other qualities of cleaning the intestinal wall. And then you have of course elimination of the foods in the form of seeds, which continue the process of spreading and growing more food. So it's a pretty beautiful process, and every other animal is in tune with it and is living it on a day-to-day basis. A lot of people don't stop and think that every other animal on the planet, and again, I know when you hear this, you're like, okay, duh.
Yeah.
But really, for a moment, really tune into the fact that every animal on the planet, every single organism eats raw food. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
If you think about that, no animal cooks its food.
Yeah.
So if there's any argument that really has merit scientifically, it would be raw food, or at least more of it. Now, of course, people will argue that the modern human has adapted to cooked food. Our guts adapted to that, and so it's something that our bodies have become more familiar with, and that raw food, it can cause people to have a bit of reactivity, gas and just guttural reactivity to the food being in that form and shape. So, some people who eat, oh man, I ate this raw food and it just makes me bloat.
Yeah.
It creates this, it creates that. It's like, sure, because basically your and again, to keep it very simple, your gut, the flora and the bacteria that's in your gut that has been populated with a particular kind of diet for a very, very, very long time is going to be disturbed when you suddenly introduce a different type of.
If you're accustomed only to cooked food, it's going to be a bit of a shock to only eat raw
and
food.
It is. It's commonly a shock.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it more scientific is when you get the same outcome repeatedly.
Yeah.
You start to. That's what makes scientific discovery have merit. Is when things are just replicable over and over. So these are the common things that happen for people when they're introduced to raw food. So. I mean, but again, how many people eat salads? Which is raw food. How many people eat raw food? I mean, raw food is consumed every single day in mass. Yeah. It's just that we are very accustomed to cooking our food. Some people get accustomed to cooking it until it's basically pudding, and it's so soft that you don't even have to chew it anymore, which is another really big important part of the digestive process is chewing. Yeah. It prepares the digestive system to break down the food. So it's all this conversation happening between the brain and the stomach, the gut. So I think that at least raw food has has some merit, to it that's really, can stand on its own. I don't know if everybody needs to be on a completely raw food diet. I think that might be an exaggeration, or maybe not. Again, lots of people do eat raw food. I know raw foodists. I was a raw foodist, so I'm familiar with, and it can be consumed, and you can stay quite healthy. And because I know people have been consuming it for 20, 30, 40 years, like literally raw food is for that long, and they don't have health conditions. I know them personally. There's nothing, I can say that, but this is not me pushing the raw food agenda. It's just an observation because I've been a raw foodist. Now, I've also eaten a paleo diet, very, very straightforward animal protein diet, and there's a lot of debate and there's a lot of support and a lot of argument for the consumption of animal product because, of course, we've been consuming it since our origins. Our cousins, our direct cousins, the chimpanzee, which is our closest cousin, the bonobo and the chimpanzee, they do currently eat the same type of diet. They are also omnivores. Okay. Yeah. They eat small animals. They eat insects. And they eat some, rough leafy greens. And they eat some fruits. But what most people don't understand about the jungle is, and again, this is because of what we've been exposed to in the form of entertainment. We think of apes eating bananas and all of these fruits, and we're like, oh, well, of course, there's these giant banana trees with abundance of bananas. That's just not accurate. In the jungle, fruit grows, sporadically, and when it does grow, it is consumed by many different creatures who are all fighting for it. It's not just sitting there
waiting,
reserved for the
chimpanzees,
for the chimps. It's not simply waiting on them.
And seasonally.
It's not, and it's seasonally. All bananas are in. It's not. That's not the case. But, yes, these fruits do. Of course, they ripen, and as they ripen, they become consumed by insects and other animals that live in the trees. And the point is, it is literally a jungle out there. It's like everybody's trying to get it. Yeah. So the thought that, people are like, oh no, I thought apes just ate fruits,
Right.
and that's not true. They eat actually a lot of animal protein, even in quite often, in I would say even the lion's share of their diet is insect protein, which is this. I mean, a lot of people again don't understand this is animal protein because it's the same, and it's a living creature.
Yes.
And a lot of folks, you know, they have trouble sort of making that connection sometimes. So, you know, when it comes to diets, apes, and we are one of the great apes for all intents and purposes, biologically. We are an omnivore, and we eat both plant and animal. We process in both, and we have been going back to the point of living in different parts of the earth, in different climates. We've been successful eating whatever we could find. So if you would think about humans that live in the colder climates, they've been able to really depend on primarily animals with practically no plants.
Right. Yeah.
Because they of course don't grow. So it's fish, it's seal, it's whale, it's a lot of course fish, and mammal. So this is the most common diet for this Homo sapien, which is again is us all. And then you switch to this viewpoint over here in these very warm climates, and you've got more fruit, and you've got more plants, and you've got more. But again, both are humans, both are Homo sapiens, and both are thriving in their own way until now. So it's not like one of them, as I said before, died off because they weren't getting enough plants.
Yeah.
You understand?
Yeah.
It's not as if one of them is dying off because they weren't getting enough spinach.
Yeah.
It's not true. Both have continued to thrive and do continue to thrive. So I think that the science doesn't support that human beings are vegetarians or vegans. It's, again, the science behind it. We're not talking the ethics of animal production. So when you think about consuming animal product or animal, I guess it's products. It's another very interesting term, because when I think of indigenous peoples living in, I don't think of them consuming products.
Right.
I think of them consuming
actually
animals or plants or
yeah.
insects. So when you think about us consuming plants, animals, and insects, what it comes down to is that we have to be incredibly intuitive, and we have to listen to what sits well with us, how our body responds. And we're back to the process of critical thinking, because we're back to the ability to sit down and observe critically how we are relating to what we just consumed.
Right.
And if you sit down and you feel terrible after you eat something, you do have to take a note.
Yeah, you have to consider what you
You have to consider it. You have to observe, and then you also have to keep experimenting.
Yeah.
Because one time doesn't mean, again, that's not how science works. You have to have a consistent outcome before a hypothesis becomes a theory. And becomes something that we share. So if I consistently feel this way when I eat this, if I consistently get my lips swell, my air way swells up, obviously
You gotta eliminate something. You're supposed to
we
figure
have
that
a
out.
problem.
Yeah.
Sometimes that only takes one time.
Right. Yeah.
But I've also known people who've had that happen. They ate something, they had an experience where they had a swelling, didn't eat that food for 8 years or something, and then tried it again and didn't have the reaction.
Fine. Yeah.
So at the end of the day, food is, you have to think about food like, just to see the wolf in your mind and watch the wolf smell its food. Like, come up to it and,
Yeah.
humans don't even smell their food anymore.
Right. Our relationship with food is
It's
just
terrible.
lost.
It's terrible.
Yeah.
And for me, I as an example, I smell my food. Maybe I started that as a habit, or maybe I just do it, but you should smell your food. Put it to your nose and connect to it and see, you know what I'm saying? See what comes up for you right away. Because you might realize you don't even want to eat that today. You might even be consuming something. It's hard for people to connect with that intuitive process because they just go, okay, what's in my refrigerator?
Yeah. What's
And
the
they
most
go,
convenient for me to
what's
consume
convenient, right? What do I remember liking?
right now? Yeah. What do I remember liking?
What do I remember instead of, what smells, what feels, what am I connecting to? Be still for a moment and just see what arises in you. And if you have that kind of relationship with food, you'll start to notice that you don't need anyone to inform you as to what you should be eating, or for you to follow any particular dietary protocol. Those kinds of things just sort of disintegrate in place of strong intuitive process from noticing, being aware. Certainly smelling is powerful. Tasting before you swallow, like actually putting food in your mouth, is powerful. Just looking at food can be powerful. Holding food in your hand can be powerful. So just your relationship with this thing you're about to consume, all very similar to how our cousins, any of our cousins, would consume. They would smell, they would taste, they would look. There would be so much interaction with this before consumption compared to the average human who just just starts consuming. And then works with the regret later. Right. Works with the feeling of bloated or sickness or nausea. They work with that later. Or drop in, blood sugar level. You know what I mean? Like whatever they create.
So all of that really helps you connect with the biological nature.
Correct.
Of the food that's in front of us.
Right. What it does too, what you're saying, what it does is it triggers, and it even brings online things that may be either dormant or basically, in a way, your body is full of potential. And what I mean by that is, if you become blind right now, your ears become they become more sensitive. If you lose your hearing, your sight becomes, it's amazing how the body adapts to necessity. So what I'm offering here is, when you become more in tune with your food, all of these dormant qualities that you aren't actually recruiting in the process of being a Homo sapien, they start to wake up. And you didn't realize, that you had that kind of keen sense of smell, or that kind of eyesight, or that kind of hearing, or that kind of sensitivity to touch. Suddenly, like when a woman becomes pregnant, as an example, she becomes incredibly sensitive sometimes to smell. Like she can smell something that you can't smell. And how is that? How does that work? How can two people be sitting here and you can't smell the same thing that I can? Because again, your senses are capable of adjustment, modification based on necessity. So the more in tune you get with your food, which is why I'm not telling you to eat this or that. I'm telling you to eat like an omnivore eats, which is to investigate your food and see what aligns with you, and see how you feel, and start to develop a proper relationship with food, because that's the only way to know what kind of food you're supposed to eat, is when food becomes a conversation for you in your life. It becomes something that's not just this byproduct of necessity. It's like, oh, I've got to eat because I've got to, so I've got to get some food in me and go on about my day. It's more, food becomes something that you actually take interest in and find discovery. If people will put so much time into their craft, they'll put so much time into becoming so skillful at building something and not know how their body responds or how their body relates to the most important thing that, besides oxygen and water, the most important thing that you really have to have in order to even be skillful at your craft. You have to have, air, quality air, and you have to have water, and you have to have nutrients in order for you to function in the kind of world we're functioning in.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's just essential.
Yeah.
So the very idea that we've lost that connection should be our first red flag and signal that we don't know what the fuck we're talking about. That, everybody's gonna, come at this with these a lot of pseudoscience, a lot of, non-peer-reviewed, experiments that aren't actually, properly conducted with real control and in proper environments, and it's just like, oh yeah, this and that, and then of course we know how many industries have paid to get a particular outcome,
right,
that suggests that this is good for you and that's good for you.
Yeah.
If I'm the dairy industry, it might be in my best interest to pay for and fund research on dairy consumption, and it might be in my best interest to look for the particular outcome I would like to find out of it. And again, that's not to suggest that there's anything wrong with having dairy. There are many, many, many peoples that dairy is an incredibly important part of their diet. Again, humans are scavengers. We can eat anything.
Yeah.
It's a luxury, and I think this is very important. It's a luxury for people to talk about diet.
Yeah, to choose what you want to eat.
Correct.
To the
it's a
scale that we do.
massive luxury to go, you know what? I'm a vegetarian now. Or I'm on a paleo diet.
Yeah.
Or I only eat elk steak. Or I'm only a raw. I'm like, do you understand the absolute privilege and the absurdity of being able to even, make that kind of decision?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's tremendous, and again, it says a lot about our ability to, manipulate and command technology, without a doubt. But it does not matter how much we command technology. It does not matter how much we can manipulate and use science to create. It does not change us ultimately. Biologically, we can have subtle degrees of shift, but at the end of the day, biologically, this animal, just like every other Homo sapien that again is existing right now in very diverse climates, we are still biologically an omnivore.
Yeah.
There is no other way to debate the point. We're still biologically an omnivore. So if you're a vegetarian and you're trying to convince another person to become also vegetarian or vegan, the argument that we're not supposed to eat meat is unfortunately it's not true, it's not accurate, and it's not based on science.
Yeah.
And someone can say, I don't believe in science. I'm like, well, then you should put down your mobile phone that you're typing I don't believe in science on, and stop believing in science.
Right. Fat on.
And just stop believing in science. So the reality is of course you believe in science, you use it every day.
Yeah.
You're just rejecting the science that supports this statement because it doesn't fit with what you believe,
Yeah.
because you're making a decision that is an emotional decision. You feel very emotionally disturbed, more than likely, by the treatment of animals or by the killing of an animal for the sustenance of another animal, and yet that is how it's always been.
Right.
It's not a new idea. It's not modern. It's very old that all animals take each other's lives as food. In the nature, in the natural world, everybody is just food for everybody. That's all. There is no other way to see it.
Yeah.
There's nobody that's not food for somebody. Somebody is going to get eaten by somebody, something, in some way. So the idea that we want to remove ourselves from that cycle, from that perfect, that perfect natural dance that has been going on since the beginning, is, again, very human.
Very.
We don't have to
yeah,
participate
yeah,
in this.
Yeah.
We don't want to participate in this. I don't. I feel very bad when I see a lion eat a gazelle, and it's like, yeah, but that you're personifying the gazelle's experience. Of course, you're seeing the gazelle and you're saying, oh my God, that gazelle, look how sad that gazelle looks. Or look how angry that gazelle looks. Or look how, desperate, or how, look at that gazelle's going to miss its mother. The problem is these thoughts are very human. And when we project them onto another creature, it's actually a disservice to the creature in a way. It's very well, it's inaccurate, just scientifically, but it's also disrespectful to suggest that our way of seeing the world
Every other animal's
is
way of seeing.
is the more importantly, not only is every animal, but is the preferred way of seeing the world.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Isn't that ironic that if every other animal saw the world through the eyes of a human, if it had the same consciousness and the same sort of way in which it interpreted reality, then, and so it must, and so
Right.
I want it to, and it should. And the reality is that is simply not true.
Yeah.
And it's actually quite arrogant, and it's actually quite dismissive of what this animal's experience of reality is. And I think that nature, by design, and I say nature again, it's the order of, cause and effect. It's natural selection at its finest, when natural selection creates a certain response in a gazelle that is actually different than the response, say, in a human. But again, the fear response, which is fight or flight or freeze, we all have that.
Yeah.
But that's something that is is a biological if for lack of a better way, it's a biological inheritance that we get from our ancestors. And so the way a human feels when it's getting eaten by an alligator is actually probably quite similar to how a gazelle is getting eaten, in a sense where you're not necessarily thinking, when you go into a limbic state, you're not necessarily thinking about problem solving. You're not necessarily thinking about emotional, gosh, I wish I had, done this and done that. But rather, you're in a state of fight or flight.
Yeah.
You're basically, your body is focusing all of its resources on surviving, not on reminiscing.
No. Yeah.
Not on thinking. It's focused on surviving. So it would probably be, in all honesty, the most zen moment of your life.
Yeah, you've never been so present.
You've never been so present
Yeah.
as being in an alligator's mouth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
The idea that you're sitting there having this run down memory lane and thinking, oh, mom, and, you might have a moment where you flash some images flash through the mind, and that could be some interesting. I'm sure there's some case studies around it, what people have thought at the edge of perceived death.
Yeah.
But more than anything, it's important to understand that all animals consume each other, and we all have a mechanism for working with it, and you have to really be okay with death in order to be okay with life. Mm-hmm. If you're not okay with death, life doesn't feel the same. And that's just crucial to understand.
Yeah.
You can't live until you've really made peace with death. So seeing something die, very disturbing for you. Imagining yourself being that thing, very disturbing for you. Mm-hmm. Understanding that death is just a part of the cycle, very, very comforting, and you can just make peace with that. And that does not mean I'm now selling meat eating.
Right, no.
Any more than I was selling vegetarianism or veganism. I'm selling you on the fact that you need to break through all of these beliefs that you have that limit you from seeing all sides and perspectives, so that you can actually get back to a primitive, primal, natural, pure state of experience with your food.
Yes.
And this will make the biggest difference, not you choosing to be this or choosing to be that or choosing, it's not going to be that. And again, not trying to convert people to other positions, not trying to sell people on how they should eat and who they should be and how they should see the world. Because the last thing that you want to do, and I go back to my previous statement about trying to argue that a person shouldn't eat meat because they're not designed to biologically, which is not accurate, that if you want to compel someone to eat less meat, it would be done through understanding that overconsumption of anything, not enough diversity can, and then on top of that, mix that in with the type of lifestyle you're living. Mm-hmm. Because again, speaking to a person who lives in a very, very, very cold climate compared to someone who's living in a hot climate, they eat different types of foods, and those foods serve the body in different ways. Yeah. So a person who lives in in the jungles of Brazil or Ecuador, you just imagine yourself as an indigenous Indian that's in the Amazon, and you're eating whale blubber, or you're eating seal, you're eating, again, I don't know how that's going to react with them based on the temperature and the landscape and how and how their body is really tuned to live. Mm-hmm. And I can say the same thing if you try to feed those same foods to someone in this very, very cold climate, this indigenous Indian here.
How much would that serve them?
How much will that serve them? Again, you adapt to, as humans do, you adapt to your environment and you work with it. From an ethical standpoint, we can all agree that factory farm raised animals, factory farming animals, is an incredibly disturbing trend in population growth for human beings. We did not have this problem when we had a population that was far less and far easier to manage. We had animals on our farms, but not in the thousands to the 100,000s to the millions. They were not packed together where disease and and all of these sort of bacterias and viruses can be transmitted so easily amongst each other, and then processed and sent out all over the world, or the treatment of these animals in order to make that kind of environment work. Because it's commonly known that they take the beaks off of the chicks. They cut them off, burn them off or cut them off, because they don't want them pecking each other when they're in such tight quarters.
Yeah.
So they burn them off at chick, and then these kinds of practices, which are basically human beings trying to solve problems, but unfortunately they're solving a problem with a living creature being sort of the collateral damage. It's not a fabric. It's not a shirt we're making, and you're like, oh man, this isn't working. Let's cut it like this. But that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
We're treating animals in a way that you would treat, any kind of material to build a product. And man, this is very disturbing.
Yeah.
And it is good cause for a person to really question where they're sourcing their food from, and what kind of environment their food is being grown in. It does cause a person. It should warrant a response.
Yeah.
It should in any person interrupt a moment and have you actually sit and say, what the fuck is going on here?
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
So you've got to find a way to balance, this out for yourself. And there is going to be in this particular, if you decide to live that lifestyle, there is going to be, and look, there's no other way to say it. You're going to be connected to the industry. You're going to be supporting the industry, and you've got to be okay with that. And that's the end of the story. It's just a matter of, you have to be able to say at the end of the day, I can sleep knowing that I'm making this particular choice. But for you to pretend it's not happening, or for you to ignore that you are funding and you're co-creating certain suffering.
Yeah.
It's not true, and you have to be okay with that. Just like shooting a deer. If you can't shoot a deer and look at it and watch it die, like be okay with it dying, you have no business shooting a deer. It's the same. It's all the same. You have to be able to hold space when you make those choices. So, this is an example of, because again, because the conversation of diet does blur. It does sort of cross into the conversation of belief, ethics, morals, values. You have to address it.
Yeah.
You can't. It's part of the conversation now.
Yeah.
It used to not be.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, you can't have this conversation with an Inuit who like I said, an indigenous Indian in the Arctic. You can't sit and debate with them dietary protocol.
Yeah, no.
I mean, you would be such an asshole.
Yeah.
Who the fuck are you to talk
Should really
to
be
them?
a vegetarian now.
I was going to say,
concerned about
yeah, who the fuck are you to sit and tell this person,
Yeah.
They shouldn't kill a
Yeah.
seal when they don't, as an example, they're not factory farming seals. They're actually part of the ecosystem that's balancing out seals, population versus their population.
Yeah.
They're part of the animal kingdom the way we all should be.
Right.
So, this is a complex conversation, and when you unpack it that way, you start to see, there's a lot of ways to see it. But our takeaway is, I must be intuitive. I must be critical I must observe my food by listening and tasting and smelling and just connecting with what I feel when I interact with it. And that is the best way to learn how to eat. It is not by following someone's advice, their protocol, their book. It's definitely science. And science, because somebody's going to say, well, what about this? This is your opinion. No, it's not. This is, what we're doing is we're using science to qualify the statement that humans are omnivores.
Yeah.
Now, go. And that's it.
Yeah.
That's all there is to it. Humans are omnivores. Now you guys go. And that's our discussion of veganism versus eating animal product.